There was a time when Johnny Depp seemed untouchable. To the public eye, he was the eccentric king of Hollywood, commanding some of the highest paychecks in the industry and living a life that looked like something out of a fantasy. At the height of his fame, his fortune was estimated in the hundreds of millions of dollars, a level of wealth that seemed impossible to ever diminish. But behind the closed doors of accountants' offices, courtrooms, and private banks, a storm was brewing. When investigators and lawyers finally pulled back the curtain on Johnny Depp's financial empire, what they uncovered shocked not only Hollywood but the entire world. Lavish mansions scattered across the globe, private islands, luxury yachts, an endless supply of rare wines, and eccentric collections worth millions. On the surface, it all spoke of extravagance and taste, but buried beneath the glitter was something far more troubling. Spiraling debts, reckless spending habits, and a trail of questionable investments that threatened to swallow everything he had built. It wasn't just about the money. These revelations exposed a deeper tragedy, the story of a man who had given his life to cinema, who had poured himself into iconic characters, only to see the rewards of that devotion slip through his fingers. Fans who once marveled at his box office power were now stunned to learn that their hero was, financially speaking, hanging on by a thread. The headlines painted him as reckless, even foolish. But the truth was far more complicated. This wasn't merely a case of an actor spending too much. It was a saga of betrayals, failed safeguards, and the relentless pressures of living as a Hollywood star under constant scrutiny. And as the documents piled up, revealing staggering monthly expenses and shocking mismanagement, the question became unavoidable. How does a man who once had it all end up here? This episode dives deep into the hidden corridors of Johnny Depp's lost fortune. It's not just about the dollars and cents, it's about the secrets, the money concealed, the forces that drained it away, and the haunting reality of what remains when the wealth of a lifetime is gone. At the height of his career, Johnny Depp's financial empire looked unshakable. Hollywood insiders often whispered that he was among the very few actors who could command paychecks that dwarfed even the most established stars. Reports placed his earnings at over $20 million per film. And when the Pirates of the Caribbean franchise sailed into box office history, Depp became the face of one of the most profitable cinematic ventures of all time. Each installment brought him not only upfront salaries, but also lucrative back-end deals, ensuring that his bank account swelled with every global release. This was the golden era of Depp's wealth. By the early 2000s, he was ranked among the highest-paid actors in the world, his net worth soaring into the hundreds of millions. At one point, analysts estimated that Depp's fortune had comfortably crossed the $600 million mark, a staggering number that reflected not only his acting fees but also endorsements, profit shares, and the sheer cultural power his name carried. With this wealth came the kind of lifestyle most could only dream of. He purchased properties across the globe, a sprawling French village complete with stone houses and gardens, a collection of penthouses in downtown Los Angeles, a Kentucky horse farm, and even a private island in the Bahamas, where turquoise waters and hidden coves promised the ultimate escape. To friends and observers, Depp was not just wealthy, he was a man who had turned his wildest fantasies into tangible reality. But it wasn't only about real estate. Depp's wealth gave him the freedom to indulge in art, music, and eccentric collections. He became known as a devoted patron of contemporary art, spending millions on original works by Basquiat and Warhol. His passion for music translated into owning state-of-the-art studios and collaborating with legendary rock musicians. For Depp, money wasn't just a tool for survival, it was the currency of creative freedom, a way to build a world where imagination reigned supreme. During this period, magazines glorified him as the rebel prince of Hollywood, a man who lived life on his own terms and seemed untethered by financial limits. Paparazzi shots of his yachts, his vintage cars, and his endless parade of designer wardrobes painted a portrait of a star who had it all. And for the fans, that image was intoxicating. Johnny Depp was proof that eccentricity and success could coexist at the very top. Yet, beneath the glamour, seeds of danger were already being sown. The sheer magnitude of wealth, while dazzling, also created a machine that required constant feeding. Every house needed maintenance, every yacht required a crew, Every staff member demanded a salary. Depp's fortune was immense, but so too were the demands of sustaining it. What looked like paradise from the outside was, in truth, an empire resting on fragile ground. If the peak of Johnny Depp's wealth was dazzling, his spending habits were nothing short of legendary. Over time, stories began to leak out, painting a picture of excess so staggering that even fellow celebrities found themselves astonished. For Depp, money was not meant to be saved, it was meant to be experienced, transformed into possessions, moments, and eccentricities that matched his larger-than-life persona. Among the most infamous revelations was his monthly spending. Court documents would later show that Depp was burning through nearly $2 million a month to maintain his lifestyle. That included a personal staff of 40 full-time employees, bodyguards, assistants, chefs, and security teams who ensured that his world ran smoothly. To Depp, this wasn't extravagance, it was necessity. But to outsiders, it looked like financial madness. His collection of real estate alone seemed designed for royalty. Multiple sprawling mansions in Los Angeles, a private island in the Bahamas, complete with homes and staff, a French village where he could retreat into a life of European fantasy, even a Kentucky horse farm, a nod to his roots. Each property came with immense upkeep costs, and Depp was known for lavish renovations that added millions to their already staggering price tags. Then there was his passion for transportation. Depp amassed an enviable fleet of cars, including rare vintage models, sports cars, and even custom-built vehicles tailored to his tastes. But the centerpiece was his luxury yacht valued at more than $20 million, on which he reportedly spent hundreds of thousands just for seasonal maintenance. The yacht wasn't just a toy. It was a floating symbol of his empire, a place where he entertained friends and retreated from the chaos of Hollywood. Perhaps the most eccentric spending category of all was his devotion to collecting. Depp became famous for his obsession with rare wines, with reports suggesting he spent over $30,000 a month on bottles alone. His art collection rivaled that of museums, featuring works by Andy Warhol and Jean-Michel Basquiat, some costing more than $10 million apiece. He also poured money into memorabilia items from Hollywood history, rare books, and even peculiar objects that spoke to his Gothic sensibilities. For Depp, these purchases were not random, they were extensions of his identity, pieces of a world he was constantly creating around himself. But as the lists grew longer and the bills larger, even friends began to whisper, how long could this continue? When the curtain was eventually pulled back, what once looked like eccentric indulgence would come to be seen as a financial avalanche in slow motion, one that no fortune, no matter how vast, could endure forever. As staggering as Johnny Depp's spending was, the real cracks in his fortune appeared when bad investments and questionable advisors entered the picture. For years, Depp relied on a network of managers and financial professionals to oversee his empire. On paper, their job was simple: protect his wealth, grow his assets, and ensure that the actor's lifestyle remained sustainable. In reality, it became a tangled web of lawsuits, accusations, and mismanagement that would eventually drain millions. One of the most publicized conflicts was with the management group, TMG, the company that had handled his finances for decades. Depp accused them of fraud, negligence, and even outright theft, claiming they had mismanaged hundreds of millions of dollars. His legal filings painted a devastating picture: secret loans, unpaid taxes, and deals made without his full consent. In response, TMG countered with their own shocking claims that Depp himself was responsible, that his spending was so out of control that no amount of financial management could save him. The lawsuits became a circus, with private details of Depp's fortune splashed across headlines, leaving fans stunned at the scale of what was at stake. Beyond TMG, there were other ventures that raised eyebrows. Depp had poured money into projects and businesses that never materialized or collapsed shortly after launch. From investments in film production companies to experimental art ventures, millions were sunk into ideas that failed to generate returns. Each loss chipped away at his reserves, eroding the once mighty foundation of his financial kingdom. The role of advisors was particularly haunting. Depp was often portrayed as trusting to a fault, a man more concerned with creativity and performance than spreadsheets and contracts. That trust, however, opened the door for exploitation. Some advisors allegedly pocketed fees far beyond industry standards, while others encouraged him to take out risky loans to cover growing expenses. By the time Depp realized the extent of the damage, the money was already gone. Even friends who had observed his finances from the outside began to question how such vast wealth could disappear so quickly. The answer lay in the toxic combination of unchecked spending and advisors who either couldn't or wouldn't say no. What should have been a team protecting one of Hollywood's brightest stars instead became a revolving door of lawsuits, mistrust, and shattered fortunes. In many ways, this stage of his financial downfall cut the deepest. Extravagant spending could be explained as personal choice, but betrayal by those paid to safeguard his life's work was another story. It wasn't just money that was lost, it was trust, security, and the belief that his fortune was safe in the hands of professionals. If the cracks in Johnny Depp's fortune were visible during his disputes with advisors, the full collapse came under the crushing weight of legal battles. Few Hollywood stars have faced courtrooms as frequently or as publicly as Depp. Each case carried with it not only emotional strain but also staggering financial consequences. The most high-profile, and perhaps the most devastating, was his divorce from actress Amber Heard. Their split was not just a private heartbreak. It became an international spectacle, broadcast across tabloids and social media in real time. Heard's allegations of abuse led to years of legal wrangling, public statements, and eventually, costly settlements. Depp reportedly agreed to pay Heard a multi-million-dollar divorce settlement, money that came directly out of his already strained finances. But the true cost went beyond the initial payout. Endless rounds of legal fees, crisis management, and reputation repair drained millions more. Then came the lawsuits tied to his career. Depp sued British tabloid The Sun for libel after being labeled a wife-beater, a trial that spanned weeks and exposed intimate details of his private life. The outcome was brutal. Depp lost, leaving him not only with a tarnished reputation but also with a mountain of legal expenses. Around the same time, he launched a separate defamation case against Amber Heard in the United States, a battle that dragged on for years before exploding into a televised trial that captured the world's attention. While the Virginia verdict in 2022 leaned in his favor, awarding him millions, the years leading up to that moment had already siphoned unimaginable sums in attorney fees, travel costs, and court filings. Beyond the Heard saga, Depp was entangled in multiple other disputes. Lawsuits with his former management company, clashes with bodyguards who claimed unpaid wages. Even contractors who had worked on his estates filed claims seeking compensation for what they argued were broken promises. Each of these cases required teams of lawyers, investigators, and consultants. For a man once worth hundreds of millions, the bills stacked higher and higher. The tragedy was not just financial. Legal battles consumed Depp's energy and time, limiting his ability to take on consistent film work. Studios became hesitant to hire him, fearing negative publicity, which meant fewer paychecks to offset the growing avalanche of expenses. The very system that had once rewarded him handsomely now seemed designed to strip him bare. By the mid-2010 seconds, what had once been the fortune of a Hollywood king was now a battlefield, littered with debts, obligations, and contracts signed under duress. Depp's financial collapse wasn't just a result of reckless spending. It was accelerated and amplified by years of relentless legal warfare. When lawyers and investigators finally gained access to Johnny Depp's financial records, the numbers were more shocking than even the most sensational headlines had suggested. What emerged was not simply the story of a celebrity who lived beyond his means, but a forensic portrait of how an empire worth hundreds of millions could crumble piece by piece. The documents revealed staggering monthly expenses. Depp was reportedly spending close to $2 million every month, a figure that stunned even veteran financial analysts. Among the line items, hundreds of thousands on staff salaries, tens of thousands on private security, and lavish sums on travel in private jets. Each month brought new bills for wine shipments, art acquisitions, and property maintenance spread across multiple continents. The scale of his real estate empire was a revelation in itself. Investigators cataloged multiple penthouses in Los Angeles, each with unique designs, as if Depp were curating a personal museum of eccentricity. The French village he purchased required constant upkeep, draining millions in renovation costs. His Bahamian island demanded permanent staff, boats, and imported supplies. Even his Kentucky horse farm, charming as it was, proved to be another financial sinkhole. Each property, on its own, might have been sustainable. Together, they formed a network of endless financial bleeding. Then there were the eccentric collections. Depp's love for fine wine was legendary, with reports showing he spent more than $30,000 per month on rare bottles, many of which were consumed at a pace that left critics astonished. His art collection, valued in the tens of millions, included works from Warhol and Basquiat. Investigators noted that while these purchases carried cultural value, their resale potential was far less certain, especially when forced liquidation was on the table. Debt records painted an even darker picture. Loans had been taken against properties, often to cover the costs of maintaining others. Creditors circled, pointing to unpaid balances and missed deadlines. What shocked fans most was the revelation that taxes had, at times, gone unpaid for years, leading to enormous penalties and interest. The image of a man who once seemed financially untouchable was shattered by the reality of overdue bills and mounting obligations. Perhaps the most haunting discovery was the lack of oversight. Depp's trust in advisors meant that many of these expenses and debts accumulated without his full awareness. By the time he grasped the scale of the problem, the damage was irreversible. For the public, these findings became a cautionary tale. Even unimaginable wealth can vanish when unchecked excess collides with poor management. What investigators uncovered was not just a financial collapse, it was a revelation of how the life of a Hollywood king, built on fantasy and fortune, could unravel into chaos. By the time the full scope of Johnny Depp's lost fortune became clear, the narrative around him had shifted forever. Once celebrated as one of Hollywood's most bankable stars, he was now portrayed as a cautionary tale, a man whose unimaginable wealth had slipped away in a haze of extravagance, betrayal, and relentless legal warfare. Yet to view the story solely through the lens of money is to miss its deeper meaning. Depp's financial downfall was not just about poor spending habits or failed investments. It was also about trust misplaced, vulnerabilities exposed, and the crushing weight of living under constant public scrutiny. Behind the headlines of yachts and private islands was a man who had dedicated decades to his craft, bringing to life characters that defined a generation. Captain Jack Sparrow, Edward Scissorhands, the Mad Hatter, each role became a cultural touchstone, cementing Depp's place in film history. That such artistic brilliance could coexist with financial chaos speaks to the complexity of his life. What remains remarkable is Depp's resilience. Even as lawsuits drained him and debts piled high, he refused to vanish from the public stage. He turned to music, touring with his band Hollywood Vampires. He returned to smaller film projects, slowly rebuilding his reputation. And despite the ridicule he endured during trials, he emerged with a loyal fan base that stood by him, convinced that the man they admired on screen was worth defending in real life. The reflection on his fortune is bittersweet. Yes, hundreds of millions may be gone, siphoned away by reckless choices and betrayals. But Depp's legacy cannot be measured solely in bank statements. His influence as an artist, his unique place in Hollywood's pantheon, and his ability to survive storms that would have destroyed lesser men all testify to a life far richer than numbers could ever convey. In the end, the story of Johnny Depp's lost fortune is a modern parable. It reminds us that wealth, no matter how vast, is fragile when pitted against human flaws, greed, and the unforgiving spotlight of fame. What they found inside his financial empire was shocking. Yes, but what they found inside the man himself was something harder to destroy: defiance, creativity, and the unyielding spirit of a true survivor. As the credits roll on this chapter of his life, one truth remains clear. Johnny Depp may have lost a fortune, but he has not lost himself. And for many of his fans, that is the greatest treasure of all.